Nice. So it's just like a review really of what I've sort of learned and practiced and how I've progressed my understanding of speed as I've gone through coaching, training, and competing in sprinting. So the purpose really isn't necessarily to tell you what to do. Like it's not one of those presentations where it's like this is the thing that everyone needs to do to sprint to get faster. Um, Not that type of person really to say those things. There's lots of different ways we can run fast. Um, but maybe might get you to think a little bit differently potentially to what you're thinking or how you might think or approach speed at this moment in time. So there are four parts, and the first part is kind of just setting the scene, a bit of like a background into my earlier years in sprinting. Then I'll look into my dissertation, the research that I did at Liverpool. Then we've got a section on like reflective practices of how I coach speed, how I approach speed in football, and some sort of common practices in football practitioners mainly. And then a little section at the end talking about like additional influences of people external to football who have really influenced like my understanding of speed and sprinting. So firstly, a little bit about myself. So I grew up in the academy of Nottingham Forest. So I played football for 10 years. I was always one of the faster players. I enjoyed kind of being fast. And even at school, like I liked running fast. I liked sort of expressing myself in that way. I got released at age 19, played semi-pro for a little bit, and then knew that I wanted to try something a little bit different. I knew that I wanted to go to uni to study sports science. So I went to Loughborough, studied sports science, and took up sprinting, took up athletics, and fell in love with the sport really. So I graduated around 2015, had a year's internship doing S&C at Trent University, and then was coaching privately in schools and with different uni athletes and semi-pro footballers and just sort of finding my way. And then in 2017, I took up a role at Liverpool. And like one of the benefits aside from the scale of the club and the resources was just really learning how to like zoom right in onto details and having a zoomed in detailed approach on all things training, all things fitness, all things football. And then throughout my time at Liverpool, I kind of looked into like the Eastern way of lifestyles of mindfulness, meditation, breath work, and kind of gone from that really zoomed in approach, looking at football and fitness in Liverpool, and then sort of having a really zoomed out approach and having like a wider perspective just of life generally. And I kind of really enjoyed like that side of learning about the body and how those practices help us. And at the end of January this year, I left Liverpool, went on a plane straight to America, spent some time at Altis, sort of shadowed and spent some time around Stu McMillan for a few days, a week or so. Went over to see Les Spellman in San Diego and see the NFL Combine prep, and kind of like restarted my interest around everything speed, and like sort of the real elite and like what are the best people doing to sprint to improve speed and to how do they see speed. And that kind of takes me, oh, apologies. Well, that kind of takes me to now, sort of trying to combine the two things that I'm really passionate about, which is sprinting speed and sort of mindfulness and well-being, and sort of trying to integrate athletic performance in the work that I'm doing with athletes and trying to also help alongside the mindfulness side and the well-being side too. So I didn't really know where to put this slide in because I think it's really important just to have a real basic reminder and a real like an important basic lens to look at speed through. So speed is obviously a product of force and velocity, step length, step frequency, ground contact time, and flight time. So spatial temporal variables. And then there are all the muscle actions that are involved with that as well. So hip extension and all the concentric and eccentric things. So, and through time and through like experience, you can maybe learn a little bit more about each lens. Maybe you can start to apply things from one lens to another, or maybe it might help you to see the body or see performance in different ways whilst thinking about one lens or a different lens or a different lens. So in terms of starting off or restarting a program, for example, maybe having your eyes through one lens is a good place to start. So I think it's always important just to remember like the fundamentals of what we're doing. So part one is kind of setting the scene. So I started sprinting in 2012 and then moved over to Loughborough around 2014, 2015. And throughout this time, I just had this question in my head, like what makes me fast? Like, what is it about my body, my makeup, and the training that I'm doing, which is making me a fast sprinter? And we've got a few photos here, which I'd like you to look at. And then at the end of the photos, I'd like you to like just shout out a couple of things which you think contribute to me being a fast athlete. And just for some context, I'm 5'9" and I'm 70 kilograms there and thereabouts. So I'm gonna shout out to Ruiz. Ruiz, give me like one or two words that you think might make me a fast athlete.
I think when you talk about build, right? If you look at the build, just very lean, very compact. You talk about your type 2 fibers, type 2X2. So you have to build for that.
Nice.
And I don't know if I have one or two words. Sorry if I'm going on, but I think you're doing all the right things in terms of a very holistic training
Awesome.
approach, right? You're sprinting, you're doing your drills, you're in the weight room. So I think that also plays a big part in creating that sprint shape.
Nice, appreciate that. And I'll go to Ed Harper as well. Ed, give us a one or two words which, from just seeing those pictures, which you might think contribute to making me fast, perhaps.
Yeah, I think 5'9" is optimistic, mate. Yeah, no, I'm joking. Yeah, no, obviously I've seen bits of your training and stuff, and obviously you're very genetically powerful. Like your jumps and stuff are decent, aren't they? And some of the stuff that I've obviously witnessed and stuff is supports obviously those muscle actions that you'll need in terms of sprinting and stuff. So there's a lot of transfer from what you do in the training environment, whether it's in the gym or on the pitch. I was going to say then, but only because you used to obviously do training on the pitches, but on the track that transfers really well and supports your sort of goal of getting quicker.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, so kind of both touched on a more of a holistic approach there and looked at everything, kind of saw the training practices and saw all the sort of things I was doing in there. Here are the three photos which I think represent maybe what make me fast. And here are some words associated with what I see in these photos. So like being quite elastic, springy, like quite tenderness and quite efficient. But in the bottom right corner and the bottom right picture, that's kind of shows maybe like the technical side. So like the positions that I can get myself into. And like I highlighted technical because this kind of like is where my head was going at the time. Like I was seeing the technical stuff as being really, really important. So then I started to like build a bit of bias around that. So 2012 to 2014, I was representing Notts AC, training at Notts Athletics Club. And my average 100-meter time between those 2 years was 11.3 seconds with a PB of 11.11. And then sort of end of the 2014 season, I moved over to Loughborough. And my 2015 average was 10.98. My PB turned out to be 10.76. So again, I kind of went through like my training diaries and went through like all the graphs and looked at what I was doing in training, like what was I doing different? Because that's quite a significant change. So I had a 100-meter improvement of like almost half a second within 7 months of being at Loughborough. And I was going through the sessions, and the sessions were quite similar. I ended up kind of falling on, I actually just learned how to accelerate. And I got taught and coached like the technical model of acceleration primarily and upright sprinting. And also in our training group, we had like a little bit of a banter between the groups and between the athletes. And there was like team meat, who were kind of like the big, heavier, kind of like 85, 90 kilogram guys who were power cleaning like 140, 150 maybe, and hip thrusting like 250, almost 300 kilograms, like the real strong, like forceful guys. And then there was like team source, which now in hindsight I see is maybe a polite way of just like the skinny guys, which I was. But Team Source, we were kind of like the technical ones and the ones that looked good doing all the reps, and had a nickname of like King Source, and like everyone was like kind of gassing me up on that. So that was like really like part of my identity, and my bias around how I was running fast was like I learned to accelerate, and like I had like pretty good technique. And then sort of add into that bias, when I stepped into football at Liverpool in 2017, there was some research going on with one of the PhD students, and he was looking at eccentric hamstring strength versus sprint speed and power. And he was like, George, like you're a sprinter, your hamstrings are going to be really, really strong. Let me get you on the Nordics. So I did the Nordics. My hamstrings weren't really, really strong. I was like one of the weaker ones out of the people he tested. And he was like, oh, it doesn't make sense. Like you're supposed to be like really strong in your hamstrings because you're like the fastest person here. But I was like, well, there's all these technical things that I'm good at, which are part of why I'm fast in there. And that's important as well. Like it's not just hamstring strength, which relates to speed. So anyway, this kind of like takes me into my dissertation, which was around 2019, 2020, perhaps. And I came up like around this question here, like is technical skill like more important than physical capacities for sprint speed? So like I said, I had that bias of being like technical, and I wasn't really that strong. I couldn't really lift all too much. My hamstrings on the Nordics weren't great. And in that 7-month period, the biggest change in my training really was like learning how to accelerate and learning the technical model. So as with any master's dissertation, you come up with a really long title with loads of words in it that you can't really say in one breath. But my title was Limb Switching Ability During Acceleration and Maximum Velocity Sprinting, and its relationship with sprint performance in English Premier League Academy players. So it was under 18s and under 21s. And I apologize, like the rest of this slide is a little bit busy, but I'll talk you through it as we go through. So the background to the research that I did was basically to say that sprinting is important for football. So sprinting actions preceding goals was way more in the goal scorer and in the assisting player than any other action. So sprinting is important. Then there was a bunch of research to suggest that sprint outputs had increased over recent years, like distances, peak speeds, number of sprints, and also rate of acceleration had all increased in recent seasons. So it's kind of like justified, right? Sprinting is important for football. And some of the earlier research that was in my lit review from like the 80s to early 2000s suggested that the stronger athletes were the faster athletes. And whether that was through testing multiple different cohorts of people and sort of comparing strength to speed, or by making people stronger, we saw that it made people faster. And a lot of that research was just kind of saying, okay, the kinetic stuff, the amount of force that people can produce was what was causing them to be fast. We kind of know that not necessarily to be true, but that's what the research was saying at the time. And then increase in physical capacities was increase in sprint performance. But the caveat to that was not necessarily in the most experienced athletes or the higher level athletes. And then more recent research, kind of early 2000s to 2015, which is when I was doing all this type of work, was looking more into like the kinematics and like how the body was moving to apply this force to the ground. And it was showing like how horizontally oriented forces were important for peak speed. So like the JB Marin type studies, how high foot velocity at touchdown was really important. Having the feet placed underneath the center of mass at touchdown, again, obviously minimizing braking forces, and high thigh angular velocities. It's always a bit of a tongue twister. High thigh angular velocities, so the limbs switching fast in the air, and also having a small gap between the knees at touchdown was all linked to higher sprint velocities. So I kind of like ran with that most recent research, like the kinematic stuff, again, a little bit more linked to my technical bias, like how are we applying these forces? So I thought I need to like quantify what technique is. I need to quantify all those like 5 points and like what does it look like? And a term at the time that was becoming popular was like limb switching, and like how the limbs switched in the air. And Jonas Dodi was doing a good job at sort of making this a bit more of a popular term. And in athletics, we were looking at videos of ourselves like sprinting and seeing like, oh, are our limbs switching or not? So to like test my theory, I had to quantify what limb switching was. So I kind of started off with this like Stu McMillan type idea, which he sort of presented on way back in maybe 2014, 15. And he was just sort of saying like at toe off, you need to have like a real big shape, a big triangle. And at touch down, you want to have a small shape, a small triangle. And then like what's important is like how the limbs are moving between those 2 points. And then across acceleration, every step, toe off, big triangle, touch down, small triangle, toe off, big triangle, touch down, small triangle. So then to quantify that, to put a number on it, I just looked at the angle between the thighs. So here at toe off, we've got an angle of 110 degrees. And then at touch down, if my eyes can see that properly, we've got an angle of 15 degrees. And all I did was subtract the touchdown angle from the toe off angle to get like a switch range angle of 95 degrees for step 1. And then I just repeated that process for step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way through to step 7, which was around about 10 meters. And all I did then was take an average of those 7 steps to give them a score of 85 or 77 or whatever their score was. And the bigger the number, the better the score. And also we can start to see how having the feet landing underneath the center of mass, how maybe having the foot moving horizontally back down towards the floor makes the foot land underneath the center of mass, how a high thigh angular velocity from this point here at toe off to this point here at touchdown allows that thigh to come through really quickly and create that small gap between the knees, which the research was saying is important. So I did it for acceleration, did the same thing for max velocity technique, same thing, toe off, touchdown, big triangle, small triangle. And these are the kind of things that we were looking at. So the methods for my dissertation were pretty straightforward. I had under 18s and under 23s. Everyone did isometric strength. So what looked at physical capacities, hamstrings, adductors, abductors. Everyone jumped. So counter movement jump, bilateral, single leg, drop jump, and horizontal jump, single leg as well. Everyone did 2 times 30-meter sprints measured by a radar gun to pick up peak speed, which was placed behind them. We had timing gates as well, but we wanted to look specifically at peak speed. Every athlete was filmed at 5 meters in the sagittal plane and at 22 meters. So getting the acceleration technique and getting the max velocity technique. And all of these bits of information were then compared to peak speed. So dissertation findings, as I was absolutely buzzing with at the time, showed that kind of the technical stuff was what was most related to the peak speeds that people were reaching. So like acceleration technique had a correlation of 0.63 with peak speed and had an effect size of 0.23. So between like the faster athletes and the slower athletes, there was like a statistically very large difference between their acceleration technique, basically saying the faster athletes had a better technique. Similarly, at max velocity, a correlation of 0.64, effect size of 1.63, so a large effect size still between fast and slow. And then the next 2 components are toe-off angle, which is here. So having a larger toe-off angle was indicative of reaching a higher peak speed, and having a smaller touchdown angle was also indicative of reaching a higher peak speed. And again, there was a large difference between the fast athletes and the slow athletes. And then underneath here, we had like in 5th place, the 5th strongest result was single leg horizontal counter movement jump, and then different technical components, and then kind of counter movement jump was coming in there. And if I remember off the top of my head, the isometric strength scores were kind of like nowhere to be seen. So I was buzzing. Like I thought, like, see, like it's all technical stuff which matters the most. So I was really happy with this at the time. But then more recently, in the last season that I had at Liverpool, I kind of continued the research in a slightly less official research manner, slightly different way of researching it as well with motion IQ, which is something I'll talk about later. And this data set included the first team as well as the 21s and 18s. So everyone did the same jumps, everyone sprinted, everything was correlated in the same way. We had these results instead. So acceleration technique was related to peak speed by like 0.1, max velocity 0.2, toe-off angle 0.1, touchdown angle minus 0.3. So when I was thinking like technique kind of runs everything, maybe it's not the case. just to remind, like, it's a different cohort of people. The first team are in there, so more senior players. And it's actually work that I want to look into a little bit more deeply just to understand it further. But it wasn't as straightforward and as obvious as I thought it was going to be, where the technical markers were the most important. So there's more work to do. And of course, it's not that straightforward. Like, sprinting and the human body is really complex. Like, we can't just think to run fast, we need to do this one thing, improve technique. Or we can't just do this one thing and get stronger. Like, there are multiple different things that are related to sprint speed, as we know. So kind of just to summarize, like technical versus physical argument that I kind of had, like, it can't be one or the other. Like, we can't be that reductionist in our thought process. We have to appreciate all elements and all sides. Physical capacities can underpin the technical abilities. So if you're thinking like the more force you can apply into the ground, maybe that foot bounces higher when it repositions and can create a higher toe off angle, a higher knee lift, for example. Weaker athletes probably aren't able to get into those really big toe off positions. So there's physical elements, they can underpin the technical elements. And again, just we need to appreciate, and I definitely needed to appreciate, like, the complexities and the different lenses at which we can look at speed through. So the next section, sort of reflecting on professional practice. So stuff that I've done at Liverpool, stuff that I know other fitness coaches have done at different teams just through communication. So have a little reflection on what has been done. So here are like the physical components of football. There's hundreds and thousands of them that are important. And here's speed, just one of those components. Remembering zooming out and zooming in. So we're going to zoom in on speed, of course. And here are our like windows of opportunity to work with the players. So when a player arrives in the building, they do all these things. We'll have them in pre-training for maybe 20 to 50 minutes. We'll have them on the grass doing the warm-up for maybe 5 to 15 minutes. If we're really lucky, we'll be able to do something within the football session. And then our next window really is like after training in the gym. We might have 15 to 60 minutes, depending on the player, the time of the week, the day, schedule, and all those things. So typically we might have maybe 1 to 2 hours to actually work with the players. And I'm bearing in mind that galaxy of the physical components to football and all the things that we need to work on. Like, sprinting is just one part. So if we're trying to make someone faster, if we're lucky, we might have like 15 to 30 minutes within that day. So we might get a little bit towards the end of pre-training. We might be able to put a couple bits in the warm-up. Then we might have some gym-related work that we can do after training. And then out of those 15 to 30 minutes, we might get 10 to 15 reps, perhaps, of maybe 2 or 3 exercises, 2 or 3 to 3 sets, 3 to 6 sets, sorry. And then sort of start to think, like, within this really limited time that we have to work specifically on speed, like, what is the purpose of what we're doing? So are we trying to make this athlete or these athletes faster? Are we trying to make them more robust and deal with the demands of sprinting that they'll get on the pitch? Are we trying to avoid injury? And this might change day to day, player to player, week to week, month to month. But always having it in our mind, like, what is the purpose of what we're doing? We've got such a short period of time to work with the players. Like, how can we make this as best as possible? So here are some like common practices, and I'd actually like each and every one of you. I can't actually see you guys on the screen, which is really annoying me, but I'd like each and every one of you just to say 2 exercises which you might do on a speed day. And I'll start with Shivani, please. Just 2 exercises.
Marching and skips.
Marching and skips, awesome. Ed.
Yeah, so med ball throws, like
Med ball
vertical
throws.
throws, express action, and pogos.
Awesome. Ruiz.
Are you looking for more specific, like track work, or are you looking also?
Whatever you might do on a speed day with any athletes that you have.
I would say a broad jump for acceleration, and then maybe a trap bar on the same day too.
Awesome. And Lewis.
Some bounds and like resisted axles.
Nice. And lastly, Tim.
Yeah, so I'm more into rehab.
Okay.
but normally I'd like to look really individually. So when I work with players, I always have like a video analysis or whatever to
Yeah.
my, I have it always.
Yeah.
So normally I would just really go very, very specific. So either I work on ankle problems, like some ankle stiffness exercises, or probably do some rate of force development work for the hemi.
Awesome.
A lot of stuff in lumbo-pelvic control as well. So
Nice.
I guess, yeah, very,
Awesome.
very, very specific.
Awesome. Yeah. So we've kind of touched on all things. We've got jumps, we've got throws, we've got drills, we've got sort of real specific foot and ankle stuff. So here, thinking with this in mind and thinking with like the limited time that we might have to make a player fast, if that's what we're doing on that day, obviously like a guiding principle for our industry is specificity. And sort of if we want to get a good adaptation, I mean, the more specific, the better. So here are just some of the exercises and some of the drills which I've done, which you guys have mentioned, that we do on a speed day. So of course, the more specific stuff is sprinting, like greater than 90% effort and speed. Like high speed runs, resisted accelerations, wicket runs, so kind of like the running type stuff. We've got skips, dribbles, scissors, jumps and plyos, and we might start be going into the gym now. Throws, lifts, iso holds, glute bridge raises, like hip locks and wall drills. And again, like just bearing in mind on this curve, if we do have the limited time, which a lot of us might have with the athletes, what's our purpose today? Is it to make someone faster? What should we choose on this curve of specificity? And that's just kind of like where my head's going, because I've done this stuff before and I've seen it where on a speed day, we've got people just doing like wall drills, and then they'll do like 2 sets of 10 wall drills. And it's like, that's kind of the speed stuff done. It's like, okay, like, but is that actually going to make people faster? Like, can we make it a little bit more specific perhaps, or have a blend of the two? So one thing we started to do really well in the last couple of seasons that I was at the club was started to bridge the gap between like the lower specificity stuff and the higher specificity stuff. And I think something that we do in football really well is like in early pre-training with the prep that we do in the gym, we tend to focus quite a lot maybe on like isolated muscle groups. So maybe doing some hip extension work or some isolated glute max activation, for example. And that might turn into some hinge patterns or into some pogos. So we tend to prep really, really well in football. And then one thing we started to do, like I said, to try and bridge the gap was have some work in late pre-training where we actually can coach the athletes now and coach the players. Can we tell them like how they should be feeling, what noises we should be hearing on the floor, and what body positions that they should be getting into in exercises that look a little bit more specific to sprinting? And lastly, can we take that into the pitch warm-up? And can we take those coaching cues onto the grass and apply what we've learned, apply what we've coached into some part of the warm-up? Can it stay conscious throughout all 3 sections from early to late to the pitch warm-up? And I think we started to try and do that really well. And if I was like still at the club, and this was something I would love to have pushed even more and more and more. But again, speed is just one tiny little element in that massive galaxy of the physical components to football. So in early pre-training, can we introduce a concept? Can we introduce the idea of the day? Could it be acceleration or max speed? And really sort of start to communicate with the players, like why they're doing certain exercises, like what it's going to lead into when we go into the late stage of pre-training. Maybe reiterating like, okay, like we've switched on these muscles, we've done these couple of exercises, now we're going to bring them together into one exercise where you can get sort of a bit more force into the ground, or you might hear it, or you might be moving a little bit faster. Just sort of reiterating what you've introduced earlier. And then lastly, like, can we just observe how they move in the warm-up? Tim sort of said at the end there, like he has his camera and has his videos. Do they apply what they've done in the end of pre-training on the grass? Like, does that technique transfer? How does that change over time, over seasons? So I think one thing we started to do was to bridge that gap and keep that curve, or keep exercises along that curve. They're just like pre-training ideas, and you've probably mentioned some of them there, and I've mentioned some as well. But I just want you to think again, like how specific like are these exercises? Again, if we have that real short window of time to work with the players, where do we want to lie our exercises along that sort of continuum of specificity? Again, these are all things that I've done, all things that I do, but with like maybe the limited time constraints, starting to think like, what can we take out? What can we keep in? And as we're going through, the exercise get a little bit more specific, thinking about the importance of hip extension, glutes, hammies. Absolutely nothing revolutionary, nothing you haven't seen or done before. A little bit of contractions between the core and the glutes now. And we start to speed up the contractions, more specific lengths perhaps. And again, as we're going through now, kind of getting a little bit more dynamic, a bit more multi-jointed. Maybe there's a little bit more sort of neuromuscular control being required in the body, starting to look a little bit more like sprinting, starting to move a little bit faster, starting to make a little bit more noise on the floor. Starting to sort of ask the body to fire a little bit faster. And again, these are all just little components of sprinting. Where might they fit into your pre-training? Where might they fit into your warm-ups? And then there's another set of exercises which could be at the end of pre-training, could be at the start of the pitch warm-up. There's kind of like gray area where they overlap perhaps. Again, thinking specificity, like this is neuromuscular control, this is foot, knee and ankle coordination, this is foot ground interactions. Maybe it's a little bit more specific to speed development than some of the ISO holds, for example. Can we get more reps in of this stuff than the less specific stuff, perhaps? And here's just a continuum of exercises from low to high. The focus being feet landing underneath the hips, which we know is important from the previous slides. Both knees in the air, both feet in the air, passing each other as they go up and down. And then the red band there is kind of just forcing me in this video to apply force a little bit more horizontally. And then you can argue that this is a little bit more specific because I'm moving from A to B. But the exercises are exactly the same. The progressions are exactly the same. The cues are exactly the same. Feet pass in the air, feet land underneath the hips. Both knees kind of move to the same height. And as we progress through these exercises, it becomes a little bit more like sprinting. Got some hands-free resisted switches. We've got some resisted accelerations. And then for max velocity then, same idea, just different cues. So we're looking at, does the heel come up towards the glutes as soon as it leaves the floor? You go from switching and sticking to continuous switches. Again, heel comes up towards the glute every step. Feet pass in the air. Same idea once more, but we're going to move horizontally. We're going to move forwards now. And you can also start to think about maybe how these exercises work with rehab players or rehab athletes. Where might they be able to sit on this continuum in their rehab? How might you progress them from one to the next? But again, all the ideas are exactly the same. Both feet pass in the air, feet land underneath the hips. For max velocity stuff, you're trying to cue the heel coming up towards the glute as soon as it leaves the floor. And you can progress these in any way. You can bounce over, you can run over the hurdles. And you build them up into a little bit of a run out here. And lastly, like a bit of a build and a fly. And just with the space in the sports hall here, the idea between the orange cones is just to apply that technique of heel towards the glutes, feet passing in the air, just at the highest intensity possible between these two cones. And you can sort of manipulate the distance that you run in and the speed that you run in as well. So yeah, so some common practices that we've done in football, that we do in team sport perhaps, but always remembering like, what's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve in this session? Is it getting someone faster? Is it making them more robust or avoiding injury? And that will then dictate the specificity that you're trying to achieve or the exercises that you choose on that day. And lastly, having in mind as well, like how do they progress, whether that's through the session, through the season, from warm-up to pre-training, to late pre-training to on the pitch. Like how does that day look? How does it progress? And just looking into a little bit more like motion IQ now, which is some biomechanical analysis and like looking at data analysis as well. Before I go into that, I really enjoy this pyramid. It made my mind make a lot of sense over a lot of stuff when I first started looking into all this data. So if we use these areas on the triangle, on the pyramid, for ways that we can make decisions. So if you're using data at the very start, that's like one piece of data, like one test, for example. So think in pre-season, that's literally like one piece of data, say a counter movement jump. Shouldn't really make any decisions based off like one piece of data. And then you've got information, which is like a collection of data. So it's kind of been processed, it's been organized, it's been grouped. And you can think of this information as like a player profile. So all the testing data, all the sort of jump scores and asymmetries put into a profile, which gives you some information on the player. And then you've got knowledge. So like applying experience and education to help problem solve and help make decisions. So think of this as planning the program now. So you're using that knowledge, you're using experience, you're using education to plan the program based on the information that you've got based on pre-season testing, for example. And lastly, like there's wisdom at the top. And this is where like you have maybe 5-10 years of doing this and you can sort of think, oh, well, I've had like 15 types of this player before with this profile, and this type of work seems to have always worked really well for them. So I'll just program this. And just sort of being really quick to make those decisions based on a lot of years of experience. And the reason why I bring this up is like with the motion IQ stuff, which I'm going to show you, there's so much data. And I was there writing reports like and reporting on every little bit of data and every like asymmetry, and like that just wasn't the best thing for me to do and I'm spending my time on, because we didn't really know much about it. I needed to collect the data more, have a bit more information, actually get a bit of knowledge and experience at looking at these things, and just bide my time with the picture that I was painting with these athletes. So quickly on motion IQ, like I said, it's a biomechanical analysis tool. It's a video that you film in the sagittal plane of acceleration of max velocity, and it gives you a hell of a lot of data. So just for example here, there are all these different pieces of things that it looks at, and eventually there's like joint angles, distant lengths, distance between the foot and the center of mass, and there's a hell of a lot of stuff here. But what motion IQ does, which is quite cool, it kind of categorizes it into the main 4 areas that it believes are important. So the spatio-temporal variables of length, contact time, step length, ground contact time, step frequency, and flight time. And it appreciates that each athlete will sort of be somewhere along this graph based on their relationship and their ratio between flight time and contact time, and their ratio between step length and step frequency. And I won't spend too much more time on here, but I'll explain it a little bit more later. But essentially, every player will fall somewhere within this graph based on their ratios between step length, step frequency, flight time, contact time. So this example here, this athlete has a really high step length in comparison to his step frequency, and he biases a little bit more towards flight time than ground contact time. That's all I'll say on it for now. So here we have a little bit of data. This is one of the athletes. So we have, well, 2 pieces of data here. So one being left torso lean at toe off, which is this bottom left picture here. So the angle of this green line when the left foot is toeing off is 6 degrees, which is an amber flag compared to the rest of the squad. And the left v right asymmetry is 80% different. So it's a red flag compared to the rest of the squad, whose average is 20%. Again, one piece of data, no need to make any decisions off it, no need to worry, no need for me to report it to everyone, but I probably did. And then here we've got left-sided toe-off distance behind the center of mass. So at the toe-off distance here is 55 centimeters behind the center of mass. And the left v right asymmetry is 5%, which is an amber flag. Again, just little pieces of data, nothing really to shout about. But then with time and collecting more data and creating a bigger picture and getting more information, we start to look at these things. So in between August and November, this player got a right-sided hamstring injury. And this sort of data set here is towards the end of that player's rehab. But we can see that the left torso lean is now 2 degrees. And the left toe off distance is now 64 centimeters. Red flag versus the squad, massive red flag versus the squad, amber flag versus the squad, and red flag versus the squad. And again, not worrying too much about versus the squad, but looking at the trend, looking at the change. So in this position here, after his hamstring injury and towards the end of his rehab, this athlete was even more upright, so even more vertical in their torso. And this foot was toeing off even further behind the center of mass. And it's important to notice that all these numbers are an average of every step throughout that 20-meter sprint. So the average of every step in that 20-meter sprint was 2 degrees for his torso angle, for example. So now start to think a little bit more, okay, like what's happening with his body? How might the muscles around the anterior hip be changed with this new position that he's in? So he's more upright and this foot's further behind the body. Like what's happening around like the hip flexors, adductors, the pelvis perhaps? Are they in even more lengthened positions now? Is there additional strain going through them because of this new kind of average pattern that this athlete's showing? And then a little bit more information again. This athlete is called a spinner. So the spinners are the guys that have the really high step frequency. So their muscles go from stretch, relax, stretch, relax, stretch, relax, like in really fast rates. And I think this athlete had a step frequency of like 4.8 steps per second or 4 hertz, 4.8 hertz. And the early research in looking at this model suggested that these athletes tend to get hip, adductor, and hamstring related injuries. So that's even more information now. We start to problem solve a little bit. And actually, this athlete got injured in his, I think, a left adductor around the end of November, December, January, sort of around this period of time. So we're going to start making decisions based on, okay, this athlete's a spinner. We know that they tend to get the adductor, the hip, the hamstring type injuries. He's also having an increasing asymmetry, like his picture is showing like an increase in asymmetry, an increase in maybe like bad positions with that more vertical torso, with that foot extended further behind the center of mass, the additional strain along like the hip flexors, adductors in that position. And a little bit more information, this athlete has a high soft tissue injury, tends to pick up 1 or 2 per season. So this is where we're kind of getting like the knowledge side of stuff. We're trying to acquire a bit of knowledge in this area. So we never really got to this point when I was at the club. Like this is kind of like retrospective. So I'm thinking out loud now. Like how should we intervene? Like, is it a physical thing? Like, does he need to become stronger in long positions for the hip flexor, for example? Is it a technical thing? Like, do we want to cue front side mechanics and rip that foot off the floor to prevent it from trailing behind the body? Is there something on the treatment table that we can maybe manipulate around the pelvis or some release somewhere which might help? Or is it all the above? And again, being like zoomed out and holistic with stuff like the Mendeguccia type of research, all the above is probably useful. So quickly, I'm just going to look at some physical interventions, which we may or may not choose to do in this scenario. So looking at lengthening the hip flexors, putting a bit of strain through them at longer lengths. Can we add maybe a kettlebell to the foot or a lightweight to the ankle? Really sort of getting that hip flexor lengthened and strong in those positions. Similar in this position here. Can you use a rowing machine? Same idea. Can you use a reformer? Putting some strain through the hip flexors in that long position, starting to tolerate that position a little bit more if this athlete's at risk of injury in that position. We know that spinners tend to be adductors are kind of at risk as well. So can we do some sort of heavy sumo squats, put some strain through the adductors in longer lengths, not quite as specific, but again, kind of looking a little bit more holistic. And similarly, Can we throw some kettlebell swings in there, wide stance, feet externally rotated, and really throw the kettlebell through some sort of fast eccentric load in through the adductors and through the hamstrings a little bit as well. Just, again, thinking out loud. Could this be a pelvis thing? So could there be something to do with the anterior hips or the anterior core, which we need to correct? So here I've got a blue band, pulling the band down. The band's going to try and pull you up. And you're sort of just contracting out the ribs, keeping a nice neutral pelvic position, hips got scooped underneath, and getting a good coordination between anterior core and glutes. Or maybe this athlete was in that position with their left foot further behind the center of mass for no reason to do with the hips. Maybe it's something to do with their rate of force development or absorption through the foot, through the ankle, through the calf, the Achilles. So maybe like this type of work might be better for that athlete in sort of building up tolerance and building up capacities in this way. And then there's some technical interventions as well. So very similar to the stuff I've just shown in the previous videos. Can you just cue as soon as the foot leaves the floor to throw the thigh towards the sky or to hit the band in front of you or the stick? Just promoting front side mechanics and trying to get rid of backside mechanics. Exactly the same idea, just moving a little bit faster, moving the hands a little bit higher, bringing the knees a little bit higher as well. Like, how can we progress through? And lastly, same idea. We just start on the spot. This video is really sticky, I apologize, but it's exactly the same as the video you did before, but the hands are free this time. And really quickly, an acceleration example based off a sagittal plane video. So if we're looking at potential risks for spinners, so people that spend a bit of longer time on the ground, really high rates, look at this picture here. And I'm thinking, like, maybe what's the eccentric load that's going through the hamstring in this position when the foot interacts with the ground. We see here how far in front the foot is ahead of the center of mass, like 20 centimeters. Ideally, you want that to be as close as possible to the center of mass. So there's a lot of braking force, there's a lot of eccentric force going through the hamstrings perhaps in this position. Now I think this here just looks like a rear foot elevated split squat. So if you have an athlete that sort of presents themselves in this way, and they're a spinner, and they're at risk of hamstring injuries perhaps, maybe when they're doing their split squats, you just increase their trunk lean a little bit, put a little bit more strain through the hamstring, and tolerate that position a little bit better. Maybe you do split jumps or something in that position with the forwards lean, or single leg hops for distance, so right foot to right foot. And again, when you're landing, you're stabilizing, there's going to be some eccentric load that goes through the hamstring in that position. So just starting to think maybe like, how can we have like a really zoomed out holistic approach to the work that we're doing? So when we're thinking about data, it doesn't necessarily have to be motion IQ, but when we're thinking about data, think about the data, the information, knowledge and wisdom, and where are we making our decisions from? Is it one piece of data or is it a collection of data? Is it our experiences? And really like zoom in and zoom out as well. Sort of go right into the details of what we're looking at, and we're looking at centimeters of difference in toe off, and then zoom out and sort of think about the whole picture as well. And lastly, just have a bit of patience with the intervention you put in place. Like it's really easy to compare yourself to another program that you see another coach doing, or a few different exercises that you see online. Like you've probably made some really good decisions at this point. Just stick with them. Give it 4, 5, 6 weeks, 10 weeks maybe. Have some patience, believe in the decisions that you've made, and yeah, sort of compare, contrast, test, retest, and see how you get on. And lastly, part 4, additional influence and my current headspace around approaching speed and just generally approaching training. So like I mentioned, spent some time with artists and like been really influential for where my head's at with stuff. And one of the biggest things I've taken away from them is the concept of like magnitude versus frequency, whereby magnitude is like how impactful it is on the body, how maybe tiring or the lasting effect that this exercise or this session has on the body. And then frequency being how often do you do this exercise? So these sprinters and hurdlers, like the biggest magnitude exercise that they have is sprinting, is flat out runs, it's neuromuscular demanding. There's all sorts that we know fatiguing for the body in different ways. So that's like a really, really high magnitude exercise. So the frequency of it then is really low. Like they do it maybe once a week at full effort, full intensity, full distances. But on the other hand, what are the low magnitude things that we can do with really high frequency? What are some of the subcomponents of sprinting that we can do that we can do like every single day? And some of these areas, I'm not going to go through in details, are being barefoot. They do a lot of stuff in the warm-up, a lot of stuff in the gym, barefoot. Foot and ankle strength, we know it's important. Another thing they focus on is hip extension. So acceleration steps, skips, things against resistance, like just lots and lots and lots of variation of hip extension. The one thing I'll look at in a little bit more detail here is the spinal engine and like how that helps us to move forwards in locomotion. So this video, I think, is taken from like the 80s by this dude here. I can't pronounce his name, Sergei Grakovsky or something. But it kind of shows the importance and the amazement, how amazing it is with the spine and how the spine connects to the pelvis and how the spine connects to the shoulders and how it links the two together. And how by rotating the spine kind of helps to undulate the hips and the shoulders and helps to move you forwards. So this is a concept that the guys at Altus are really running with at the moment, is using the spine as much as possible to maintain its effectiveness with locomotion. So here are just 3 examples of how they do that. Lunge variations. There's 110 different versions of these, some with an Olympic bar across the shoulders, some without, some with no equipment. But it's just, again, thinking, what's the purpose of what we're doing? The purpose here is to move the spine, to sort of use the spine in the warm-up in as many different ways as possible. And then after the track session, there's this funky little medicine ball on strings here. Things like 6 kilograms. Again, spine's laterally flexing, there's rotation. You see the hips moving side to side. There was some medicine ball throws in this part of the session as well, with rotation side to side too. Really low magnitude stuff, not damaging, not fatiguing, but high frequency throughout the whole day, every single session of the week. Beginning, middle, end, something to do with the spine. And you can replace the spinal engine for anything that's important to you in your training, but with that in mind, like magnitude versus frequency. And lastly, Spellman Performance, NFL Combine Prep. Like for me, like, is this a gold standard of speed testing? We'll go through the video here really quickly. We've got all sorts happening. We've got a 5-second run. We've got the yellow cones, which gives us the biomechanical analysis from Motion IQ. We've got the GPS vest, which gives a live peak speed, so we can get some feedback straight away. And we've got the timing gates to give us, again, performance outcome, time splits, like how fast is this athlete ran. So all these things here for me are like a gold standard. So within a 4.5 second sprint, you can get a lot of data, a lot of information, performance, kinematic, live feedback. It's really, really cool. And then in their speed session, there was 3 sections. There was an unresisted sprint, which this athlete's doing here. There was an assisted sprint, which this athlete is doing here. He's just getting lined up on the 1080 sprint. And there was a resisted sprint, which this athlete is doing here. He does his resisted sprint. He has his peak speed shouted out. He unclips from the belt. The belt comes flying back in. And the next person goes. So for me, I'm thinking now, like if I'm working in a football club, I'm not going to have a 1080 sprint on the pitch probably, but maybe in that 5 minutes of the warm-up, have 3 lanes. Like thinking again, magnitude versus frequency. Can we get a lot of hip extension work done, a lot of foot ground interactions? Could there be skips for height and distance in one of these lanes? Could there be dribble bleeds or dribble runouts? Could there be some walking accelerations? And could athletes just go from one to the other to the other? A set of 3 on each. That's like 9 exercises almost in 5 minutes. Is that a little bit better than just doing some marches, some A skips, and then a race off, for example? Again, just being smart with the time that we've got. to sort of summarize like my current headspace and what I think is important when approaching speed and generally applying this to different areas of training as well. So having like a really holistic profiling method, like taking into consideration like physical and technical. I'm aware now that technique isn't everything, and sort of I'm able to appreciate the nuances of technical ability, but I'm also appreciating how physical and technical like interact with each other. And think like film reps, like you don't have to have motion IQ, which is like £20 a video. You can just film reps, you can look at them, you can compare and contrast. And thinking time smart as well. So using time wisely, we might only have 15 minutes to work on speed, for example, on that training day. And that might happen twice a week at best. So thinking again around like, what's our purpose and how specific can we be to maximize like this small window of time that we have? And lastly, one of the most important things for me is this concept of like magnitude versus frequency. So like maybe there are some things that like you have to do every day just to make a difference. Are we going to do something 2 sets of 8 twice a week if we're really trying to make a change for someone? Is that actually going to help? Maybe not. Like start to think about how much impact are we making on the athletes with those decisions that we're making. And yeah, thank you very much for listening on a nice Wednesday evening. Most of you will have me on Instagram, but if you haven't, that's my Instagram handle. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in. Feel free to type them. Feel free to shout out. If not, and you need to shoot off and get off, all good. Happy days. Thank you for joining. Any questions from anyone? Ruiz, you look like you're going to ask something, bro.
I was just gonna say I had a couple before, but I think you kind of answered them throughout. I definitely will go back through this and we'll definitely shoot you up some follow-ups.
Awesome.
But I think this, not a question, but I think this just pairs up very nicely with, like, honestly, this week, because I met with Universal Speed Rating yesterday with my team. Again, like I told you, doing like Foley's course, he does a lot of the data standpoint, and like you said, like literally, as you put it, data, info, knowledge, wisdom. So yeah, man, this has been amazing. So thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining, man.
Yeah.
Anyone else got anything else they'd like to ask or add? If not, honestly, no worries. All good?
That was really good, mate. Thanks for that.
Cheers,
got
Ed.
loads of stuff. I'll probably come back to you with some questions and stuff if that's all right.
For sure. Of course, mate. Yeah. And likewise for anyone else, if you want to ask me any questions, just drop me an email, drop me a message, and I'll get back to you when I can.
And is there any chance you could share the slides as well?
Yeah, for sure. I'll share the slides over to you guys too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan.
You're welcome, man. Right, guys. Have a good evening and a good afternoon to you, Ruiz.
Thank you for that, Jordan.
Thank you,
See you
man.
later,
Have a
guys.
good
You take
day.
care. See
Have
ya.
a good
Cheers,
See you
you
guys.
too. Bye-bye. Bye.